Paulina, hello, hello. How are you? No, yay. Hi, Paulina. How's it going, Paulina? Hi.
Good, and you?
Hey, there she is. I'm well. I think that Miss Renard warned you to have some strange substitute guy popping up today. So that's who I am. Hi, I'm Mr. McGee. Malik and I have known each other pretty well for a hot second, but nice to meet you, Paulina. Um, how's the day treating you so far?
It's well, and yours?
It's creeping along. Thank you for asking. Um, And just as a quick FYI, we do have some stuff to cover that Miss Renard left that we're gonna get through. I'll give some people a couple more minutes to wander in digitally, and then we'll get started, even if it's just the three of us, and we'll record this. Of course, we are recording this and get through what we need to do, just to give you a little bit of a here, there, and everywhere. We're going to continue on looking through. We'll start with Martin Luther King Jr. and we'll continue on through that conversation you were having with Miss Renard, and then moving into the 60s, 70s, and 80s, trying to tackle all of that. Hey there, Avon. Good to have you here. And I think Miguel is on his
Hi,
way in
how
as
are you?
well. Doing all
Wait,
right, Avon. How are you today?
I'm doing okay.
Yeah, making it all right?
Yep, just trying to finish school.
Good, good. I mean, I think that's where we're all at, right? And then Miguel, good sir. It's been a minute. How are you? You making it?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Just trying to keep up with my work and stuff. How you doing?
I'm just stumbling ever forward, man. Same old, same old. Thank you for asking. We are going to jump into things almost immediately. Now, the first thing we have to do is actually we're going to watch a video of Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech. Now, while we do that, I'm going to need y'all to do something for me, and that is I need you to take some notes, right? And we're going to discuss this here in just a minute after all of this good stuff, okay? I'm sure you guys have probably heard bits and pieces of this. Um, but I want you to look at this from like a historian's perspective, right? I'm going to put some please here in the chat. So as you're watching, there's a couple things looking for you, or what we are looking for. Excuse me, if I could speak. And people look at this as a moment, like a lightning rod moment, which it was, right? A moment where he's asking for kindness. Awesome, that's great too. But there is this demand of America living up to its promises to its people, right? So keep an eye out for that. Keep an ear open for things where he mentions equality, where he specifically mentions democracy, right? There's tons of imagery, tons of references. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share this. I'm going to mute myself, all right? And then we're going to watch this "I Have a Dream" speech, letting you know that it's only 4 minutes, 50 seconds, man. This is a short one, okay? But then we're going to come back around and use this as the foundation of what we're talking about today. Now, when we come back, if you are capable, able, Mr. Renard reminded me to remind you guys, please turn those cameras back on. Thank you, Malik, Miguel. But for right now, I'm going to pause and stop mine so that we can focus on the video at hand, which is going to be the Martin Luther King Jr. "I Have a Dream" speech. Okay, so please, please, please pay attention. Take some notes. Be prepared with specific observations from this speech. Let's see if I've got the right thing open. I do. I'm going to mute myself. I'm going to shut up and let you guys experience this.
1963, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered a speech that would define the civil rights movement and his legacy. This, of course, was his "I Have a Dream" speech, delivered on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom.
I have a dream that my four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
The March on Washington served as a massive push for economic and political justice for African Americans. Held during the year celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, crowds marched on the National Mall to watch a variety of musical performances and speeches. Dr. King, a Baptist preacher and prominent civil rights leader, was scheduled to speak towards the end of the day, his debut on the national stage. Up until that point, King mostly addressed small crowds at black churches, rallies, or fundraisers. This time, he would be seen by nearly 250,000 people on the ground, as well as millions at home watching on television. This was an opportunity to reach a wide audience and persuade the public and the government to take action against racial injustice. The night before, King worked with a close group of advisors to get the speech just right. They worked through the night, settling on a final draft in the pre-dawn hours of August 28. Interestingly, the phrase, "I have a dream," a phrase he used in earlier speeches, was nowhere to be found in this copy. The words wouldn't manifest until almost halfway into Dr. King's speech, when gospel singer Mahalia Jackson, who had performed earlier in the day, called out to him from the sidelines to tell them about the dream. King set his prepared remarks aside and improvised the rest, crafting a soaring speech that would sear into the minds of millions of Americans.
No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
The speech was divided into two parts. The first listed the injustices that African Americans faced: segregation, police brutality, disenfranchisement, and discrimination, and urged a call to nonviolent action. The second launched into King's dream of peace and racial harmony, a vision of a future in which people will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
I have a dream.
Highlighting King's skills as a preacher, I Have a Dream was part sermon and part poetry, using rhetorical devices like repetition, rhyme, and vivid metaphor to drive his points home. It was peppered with historic, biblical, and literary references that moved the crowd. This message of struggle and hope became the defining moment not only of King's career, but also the civil rights movement. Both the speech and the March on Washington were credited with helping secure the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, a landmark piece of legislation that ended segregation and banned discrimination on the basis of race or sex in the workplace.
Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty! We are free at last!
The speech also resonated with activists around the globe. I have a dream. The phrase that wasn't even meant to be in his final draft appeared in political actions all around the world. It's considered one of the world's most transformative and influential speeches, alongside others like Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address and Winston Churchill's Blood, Toil, Tears, and Sweat. I Have a Dream is only one of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s many achievements, but it's nonetheless one of the most pivotal.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.
Okay, squad, if I can actually get my own camera working, that would be phenomenal. And if you guys could flip those suckers on so we can be here and present together, that would be great as well on your end. Now, before I reshare my screen here, okay, I want to ask if anyone has any sort of, how can I put this? Does anyone have anything that any observations you'd be willing to share, whether it's what you heard in the video, your own experiences already having studied King? Because I bet you guys, most of you have probably heard or seen this speech before, but would anyone be willing to share anything? And you don't have to, no worries, no need to raise your hand, just pop on in. Tell me what you think. Anybody have any observations you'd be willing to share? And again, if you can, turn those cameras on. No wrong answers right now.
I feel like this speech really inspired like millions of people, and like it helped the civil rights movement grow stronger, and like really like influence the laws of like equal rights in America.
Absolutely. Thank you, Malik. Can't find fault with that one. Anyone else? Anyone else have something else that you'd be willing to share there? These initial impressions. No? I remember the first time I heard this. My mother is a U.S. history teacher, and so when I was little, I actually would hear this pretty often going to her classrooms. And my father's also a preacher, and so I remember how powerful this was for me. Just as a young one, just understanding that there was power in the words, even before I understood what the words meant. And I think that that's something to be noted. That's my own little anecdote. Now, really briefly, one of you wonderful scholars, are you seeing this important people slide that I have up? Is that what you're seeing right now? Great. I was sharing I'm doing a new manner of sharing things via Zoom, so I appreciate you guys being patient with me. So certainly, Malik, you said that this holds power. It becomes a crucial point, right, in the civil rights movement. And I mean, honestly, King then becomes the most famous leader in the nonviolent civil rights movement. Some of you guys are also taking American literature, and you've encountered Henry David Thoreau. You've read some King in that class as well, and now some of us are reading about Malala and how all these nonviolent movements are connected. But King, here in the States especially and beyond, became this central figure. Now, very importantly, Thurgood Marshall is another important person that we need to underscore. That name you might not have heard as much, as we're talking about important people that you really need to have on your radar for this time in the U.S. Thurgood Marshall, if I could use words there, he used the court system, right, to push back against segregation. Okay, he argued the very, very famous Brown versus the Board of Education is the full term of that one. That's the Supreme Court case that pushed back against segregation. And Thurgood Marshall later became the very first Black Supreme Court justice. If you go to, I mean, honestly, kick around New York or D.C., a lot of major cities, there are very great many Thurgood Marshall memorials, plaques, courthouses, things like that. Big time player in this movement. And then John Lewis, you guys can put up a digital or a real hand. I'm curious, have any of you ever heard of John Lewis? Maybe?
I
No,
never heard of him. No,
lots of no's. Okay. So
no.
John Lewis only recently passed away, actually. He's been an influential senator since way back, right? He started as a student leader of what's called SNCC. And on the March for Selma, he very famously, just in the eye of history, was beaten quite badly during Bloody Sunday in Selma when the protesters, the civil rights movement partakers, were marching across the bridge, marching into Selma, Alabama. John Lewis has been a central figure in politics for quite a while in the wake of that, and again, only unfortunately recently passed in the last few years. It might have been 5 or 6 years ago. Medgar Evers, I can't ever say his name the first time. That is another important person you should scribble on down and keep in your notes. He worked for the NAACP in Mississippi. He was actually assassinated in 1963. He was a field secretary. And this was one of those moments nationally where people realized, holy smokes, this is very dangerous, right? Even people who are being nonviolent and are, honestly, like functionaries in this movement, although like justice warriors in their own right, they actually are in the same like dangerous space as those people on the front lines. And then lastly, for this slide anyway, for our important people, is A. Philip Randolph. And he basically made a major connection, right? He wanted to bridge the civil rights movement with the labor rights movement. He noted that economic justice, right, to be able to make money, to sustain yourself, that is important to civil rights. All right. Now, any questions about any of these important figures here, guys? Because I hate just talking at you, but we do have a lot to cover. So any questions here? I'm seeing no's around. In that case, moving from individuals into groups, okay? And this can get a little bit tricky, right? You can see, for example, the first group we have is CORE, or the Congress on Racial Equality. It can be very easy to get all these alphabet soup style acronyms like all whacked out in your head. So make sure and write down if you're, if you're taking notes, if you go back and touch base with this video again in the wake of class, make sure that you are actually going back and making sure you understand what all these acronyms stand for. That will actually help you in just understanding the full breadth of all this. So CORE actually helped organize freedom rides and other direct action protests. The freedom rides, of course, looking to desegregate the busing systems, train systems, tram systems, but the buses are the ones I'm familiar with. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or the SCLC, this is an organization that worked through black churches. Very, 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 one more time for the record, very closely associated with Martin Luther King Jr. SCLC and Martin Luther King Jr. are often spoken of almost like they're inseparable. They weren't necessarily hand in glove all the time, but a very important group nonetheless. What I just told you that John Lewis was a part of, right? SNCC is what a lot of people call this, or SNCC. It's the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Guys, every one of you in here, you're students, man, right? This was led by students, and it became one of the most powerful groups in the push for civil rights during sit-ins, helping with voter registration, like really pushing local populations to sign up for voting, as well as the big Freedom Summer that encompassed a lot of these actions. The NAACP you probably have heard of before. And that's the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, is what that actually stands for. And it has just become so synonymous with civil rights. NAACP is pretty ubiquitous. People know what that is, right? And that is heavily focused in the courts, right? We're bringing court cases. We're bringing legal strategies. We're making sure that the law reflects what it is we need and what we want. All right. And then lastly, just really trying to crush this down into a few bullets. The last group that we'll touch on anyway is the Urban League. And the Urban League focused on jobs, housing, and economic opportunity. And this is this idea that if you have a job, you have a place to stay, and you have a means to make money, then you can really see yourself, just flourishing in life. Now, all of that's great, right? All of those groups, all those people's cool. But what came of it, right? I gave you some important groups here. We have some important people here, but what did we actually tackle, right? Well, I think it's always nice to start with the positive, right? The Civil Rights Act of 1964, that was passed, right? Banned discrimination in public places and employment, huge, right? The Voting Rights Act shortly thereafter of 1965 banned discriminatory voting practices, things like literacy tests, poll taxes, things that were held over from Reconstruction, the Jim Crow laws and those sorts of things. The Civil Rights Act of 1968, notice this is a 4-year span, boom, boom, boom. And also the Fair Housing Act, both of these together, they banned housing discrimination. This is huge, right? We can be in public places, there's going to be equality there. No segregation discrimination. There's not going to be segregation discrimination in employment. There's not supposed to be discriminatory practices with voting, meaning we can elect representatives that reflect us, and also in housing. Huge, right? However, 4 years seems like not much. That's a long time, and the actual change in the wake of those laws was very, very slow. Many southern states in particular, although not exclusively, resisted integration. So even like 10 plus years after Brown versus the Board of Education, right? The Thurgood Marshall case that we just talked about, only a small percentage of black students actually attended integrated schools. The schools stayed separate, right? And so this is when you see people getting really frustrated and you see radicalization in the movement. Now, you can see things like the riots called the Watts riots. The Black Panthers come out of this. Very, very importantly, Huey Newton and Stoneleigh Carmichael with SNCC. But Malcolm X is probably the person you most know in regards to the radicalization there. So we're getting all this stuff going on. Change is not moving fast enough, right? But here is a chart, right? The impact of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. What I would love for you to do, anyone, everyone, whether it's in your notes, maybe put it into chat, but I'd love to hear a couple of your voices. You tell me, if as you look at this chart, right, the registration before the Voting Rights Act is on the left. The registration after the act is passed is on your right, right? Black residents are in orange. White residents are in teal. I think that's teal. I'm curious if you can make 1 to 2 to 3 observations from this chart. What do you see? And you can write them in your notes for yourself for later. Pop them into chat. Let me know what you think. But would anyone be bold and jump out there and tell me what are you seeing? What's the difference? What's going on from before to after the Voting Rights Act? How did that affect whatever? And I'm going to take a long drink of water and let y'all think for a second. No, nobody. What, let me ask you this. Who can tell me what the Voting Rights Act was meant to do that we just zipped through? What was that meant to do again? Nobody? Don't be shy.
I mean, after the act, like the gap like between the black and white voters became much smaller.
There you go, Miguel. There you go, right? You're seeing that. I mean, look at I'm specifically thinking, look at Mississippi, right? MS, right on the left. Look how small below. I mean, that's like forget 20%. That I mean, we're getting down to almost zero in Mississippi voter registration of black residents. That after 1967. So this is 2 years after the Voting Rights Act. Mississippi is up to 60%, right? I would argue that that's pretty big deal, right? So, yeah, thank you, Miguel. I mean, this chart shows that black voter registration increased significantly. Yay. Um, Looking on the left-hand side, compare the white versus the black citizens voter registration in these states. What's
I
the
mean,
easiest thing you noticed? Yeah,
I
Malik.
mean, before the law, like white people had much higher voting registration rates than black people.
Off the charts, right, Malik? Like off the charts, right? In almost all southern states. The only state that you had like you're getting up to the 40-50% ahead of time is North Carolina. And even then, like Malik, your statement stands, right? So that is right there in your face with this. So when you think about this, I mean, what you're seeing, guys, the chart on the left is 1965, so right before that's passed. The chart on the right is 1967, 2 years down the road. Now, it didn't create equality instantly, did it? I mean, even in 1967, you're not seeing 100% of the residents, the black residents, get there. And so it made a major difference, right? Because it gives the federal government power to stop these discriminatory, voting rights or voting practices. Again, slow incremental change. Martin Luther said, "I don't want." Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I don't want to wait. We shouldn't wait." But you see, there is power in that Voting Rights Act. Now, okay, we're making incremental progress, but golly gosh, y'all, the promise is not fulfilled, right? The promise that King is saying this nation needs to, make good on to its residents. So by the mid 1960s, that frustration is starting to show, right? Things are slowing down. We're trying to get things going. Like, we passed that in 1965, 67 is like, we're getting there. So you have other people pop up. Malcolm X is, as I said, probably one of the civil rights leaders that you maybe know a little better than Stokely Carmichael over there on the left. Malcolm X argued that Black Americans had the right to defend themselves, right? And that largely because America had failed to do so, right? You are not protecting our communities with your resources. Therefore, we have the right to stand up and protect ourselves, right? And if you look at it, and I'm trying to find it here, there it is. And this is from Malcolm X. If we don't do something real soon, I think you'll have to agree that we're going to be forced either to use the ballot or the bullet. It's one or the other in 1964. It isn't that time is running out. Time has run out. It's already too late for you to start making nice kind of thing, right? That's some really strong language, right? Stokely Carmichael is the person who actually popularized the phrase Black Power, right? This did not simply mean violence, of course. It meant like pride, self-determination, political power, community control. Both are reflecting growing anger over unfulfilled promises. Now, really quickly, I know this sounds kind of silly, but just for the sake of it, um, what do you think? What's the comparison to Martin Luther King Jr. here? We started with "I Have a Dream" speech, and you guys have already talked a little bit about MLK. Um, what is it? Where do you see? How do you feel about, or what do you see in history? Malcolm X's legacy or Stokely Carmichael's legacy. Do you have anything that you've encountered in the past, or any thoughts about that in the wake of seeing Martin Luther King Jr. and talking about his legacy, albeit briefly? Or, can you condense one of these leaders' thoughts into a phrase or a movement? And this is hard stuff, y'all. No? Let me ask you this. Who has read or at least heard of Malcolm X before? Have you guys heard
Um,
of Malcolm X before?
I
Miguel
heard of
said
him,
yeah,
but
Avon.
I never like read anything about him for real.
Yeah, I've heard of him, but like I don't know like a lot about him.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, this is great. Like to have this quote here then in front of you, like straight, like quote, right? And it's very important because a lot of people will mischaracterize his words, right? So it's good that you guys have this direct quote right here in front of your eyes. And again, I read that second paragraph about the Ballad of the Bullet. That's the place where people really get hung up on. But look at that first paragraph of Malcolm X. Now, in speaking like this, it doesn't mean that we are anti-white, but it does mean we're anti-exploitation. We're anti-degradation. We're anti-oppression. That seems pretty reasonable, right? And if the white man doesn't want us to be anti him, let him stop oppressing and exploiting and degrading us. That's the first half of that quote, right? Growing anger, unfulfilled promises, real frustration. And so you also have the Black Panther movement born out of this, right? Now, more often than not, what do you see from the Black Panthers when you look at pictures when people are talking about this in history, right? The berets, often being armed, right? A militant image. But they are also creating community programs, right? Tons of free breakfast programs for kiddos, food distribution to communities, health clinics, political education, so people knew their rights to vote, right? The Black Panthers believed that Black communities needed protection from police brutality and governmental, neglect, and they said, you know what, we're going to fill that role, right? So they showed how the civil rights movement expanded from like just legal equality, courtrooms, to questions of things like power and safety and poverty and community safety and survival, right? I love that picture on the right that often gets put up with the Black Panthers of the little ones, like getting the food programs together, right? The little sacked lunches, the sacked breakfasts, and that's something that quite often is lost in the fray. Okay, now again, I don't want to run out of time, so we'll keep on rolling on through. But the Black Civil Rights Movement saw successes. Now, again, it's slow, incremental, but in seeing the successes of this movement here in the US, other groups said, you know what? That's how you do it. So you have women, Latinos, Native Americans, and other indigenous peoples, Asian Americans, LGBTQ plus Americans, all starting to push for rights, recognition, legal protections, right? And the 1960s, then, that this era that we are dabbling in, it creates a broader rights revolution. You have tons of people coming on through, right? So let's briefly go through a couple of those other movements and see if we can't get through this. And I would love to. I'm going to stop between each movement, if you will, and just see what, when, how, where you have maybe encountered these ideas before. But again, we have a women's movement, right? And there's a very famous book called The Feminine Mystique. It's by Betty Friedan. And it argued that many middle class women in particular felt trapped by the expectation that they are only of value if they are married, if they have children, if they can do good housework. And so this comes out, she refers to that type of life as a gilded cage, meaning you don't have it rough, but man, you're not having real life, right? And so you have a number of things come out of that. A feminist revolution come out of that. A women's rights revolution come out of that. And again, in the wake of the Black civil rights movement. And so the National Organization for Women, or NOW, that formed in 1966, right in the middle of everything we're talking about, right? What is their deal? They say we want equal pay, workplace rights, reproductive rights, legal equality enshrined in law, right? And then Title IX, if you look underneath successes, huge success. It expanded opportunities for women and girls in education and athletics. If any of you have ever played sports, you've probably seen Title IX clauses, whether you knew it or not, because that is a huge part of that. I taught for college for a long, long time, and that was a huge part of that. Another success that was underneath that, that's underneath that banner, is Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court decision guaranteeing a right to privacy, and therefore that legal abortion was guaranteed via that 14th Amendment. Now, there's a note there, and that is that the U.S. Supreme Court actually just reversed that decision. That was in 2022. Can't believe that was 4 years ago. That's bananas. But that repealed that constitutional right. So that might be a little bit of a shortcoming. Now, all that being said, I'm sure you've heard of, workplace inequalities, and in specific the wage gap, where women on average do not receive the same pay as men. And then also the Equal Rights Amendment failed to pass, right? And so that's called the ERA. This gets talked about all the time in the Senate and the House, if you're paying attention. And women continue to face wage gaps, barriers to leadership, glass ceilings at jobs, because this ERA never has passed. It comes up every now and again, like I said, in the Senate or the House, but thus far it hasn't gotten through. Any questions or comments here? Has anybody read, by any chance, Betty Friedan, The Feminine Mystique? Not many have.
No. I heard of it, but I never.
You heard that one too, Miguel? Yeah, I didn't read that till I hit college, y'all. So no shame there. Maybe you will in here, but just keep in mind, I think one of the biggies from this slide, y'all, is 1966 for the National Organization of Women. Just so you can see like where this is crossing over with the Black Civil Rights Movement, right? As you see these rights movements crop up. Now this is crazy how history changes on the daily, right? Latinos also started pushing in this movement, right? Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta formed the United Farm Workers, or UFW, right? This is, again, a push for non-violent struggle, right? For farm workers. Born out of the California migrant workers and things of that nature, UFW really picked up steam. Farm workers, honestly, and I mean, if you look at modern agricultural practice, often still do, face low pay, poor housing, very unsafe working conditions, like the kind of stuff there where you might lose a limb, kind of unsafe working conditions, very little legal protections. And so Chavez and Huerta used strikes, boycotts, nonviolent protests to demand better wage and working conditions. Now, all that, strikes, boycotts, nonviolent protests, that should sound really familiar because you guys just covered that with Martin Luther King Jr. and the Black Civil Rights Movement, right? We're all going from this. Now, again, look at UFW. UFW, when was that founded? 1962. Again, this is all cropping up sort of in that same moment in U.S. history. Very importantly, something for you guys to keep in mind, and that we have over there underneath Dolores Huerta, is the Delano grape strike. It is one of the most famous strikes that there is. Farm workers struck, I guess is the past tense of that, in 1965, right? And this became connected to this movement, right? And it connected civil rights to labor rights, immigration, language, education, economic justice, a lot of stuff that seems very normal to us now to be part of that civil rights movement. Now, under the shortcomings, migrant workers still to this day continue to struggle with those conditions and that low pay. And additionally, and unfortunately, when you have flawed humans in places of power, you often get reminders that they are flawed humans. And very recently, like last week, the last couple weeks, it comes out that Cesar Chavez had been abusive of some of his female UFW companions and coworkers and peers. And so California is moving quite rapidly to take his name off of lots of buildings and take down statues and things. And so, unfortunately, a very flawed person, it turns out, doing some important work with the UFW. So Unfortunately, that makes is just yet another hurdle for people seeking Latino rights, in particular farm worker rights, to continue to push. Now, we need to go into hyper mode, so I'm going to go fast really quickly to try to make sure that we get through everything that Miss Renard asked us to today and get through all of these movements so you can be prepared to get to the next very exciting element of your course here at the end, which is the 70s, 80s, and 90s, which is wicked cool because normally you don't get to that in a U.S. history class, and I think that's so important. So anyway, Native Americans, another group really pushing for rights here. Please do keep an eye on this. I'm hoping that you're taking some notes yourself, or we'll come back and revisit the recording. But Native American activists are also fighting for rights as well. The communities had faced, tons of poverty, addiction, loss of land, broken treaties, and a real pressure to assimilate. Okay, meaning to become part of mainstream American society. The American Indian Movement, which is a group, AIM or AIM, demanded tribal sovereignty, meaning we have rights beyond this nation. We do not want to be part of the USA. And that is that right of the native nations to govern themselves, which is really powerful, right? And so lots of activists bringing to attention to treaty rights that have been on the books for sometimes hundreds of years, cultural survival, right? Mistreatment of the tribes from the federal government for long periods of time. And to this day, speaking of shortcomings again, and I lived down near Oklahoma. My father lives in Oklahoma and actually does quite a bit of work on reservations with quite a few native tribes. And many, many still live in poverty. And I've seen that firsthand. And it's heartbreaking, right? Roughly about 25%, a quarter of indigenous Native Americans live in poverty compared to 8% of whites. And the highest poverty rate of any minority group is Native Americans. All right. I think one of the most powerful things that came out of this, certainly the Trail of Broken Treaties you see there from AIM, but also in 1978, we have the Longest Walk, which is where we have basically a 5-month protest, right? And I do apologize because my doorbell is going off here in New York City. But basically, Americans, broke these treaties, and it was a 5-month long protest that was really focused on highlighting that. Now, Asian Americans, another group fighting for it, challenged discrimination, stereotypes, exclusion, right? The movement grew, partially from that same student activism in the 60s that was very popular. Asian American students demanded things like ethnic studies. Let us all know where we are from, who we are. We want better representation in society and a better representation of Asian American history, less propaganda. They also protested racism, immigration discrimination, U.S. wars in Asia, especially Vietnam. And then the term Asian American itself actually became a political identity, right? It was meant to unite different communities. Before that, you were called often derisively by wherever maybe your ancestry came from. Right? So this is very powerful. Now you can see some of this is a little bit more recent. So I'm going to mute myself for 2 seconds. I've got to get my door, and I would love it if someone would tell me something you noticed from these key events. And apologies for that interruption. Looking at the key events here, because we are having to move very quickly. I don't want you to think we're just brushing past this. Anything here that you observe that has reverberations back to King, back to the Native American movements, back to anything else? Where are some through lines here? I'm going to take a big, long drink of water. No? Look at the bottom left hand of this slide here. 1969 Third World Liberation Strike. I want you to take notice. Where is that taking place? Who is at the forefront of this movement? I'm going to say again, open ellipses, ... Students, man. Students, right? And specifically, in this case, at San Francisco State University, it was the AAPA, or Asian American Political Alliance, pushing for this, right? Um, so as you're continuing on with this, I hope that you will keep this in mind. And we do have a couple more things to cover and the LGBTQ plus movement, but students are leading this quite often, guys, and that's powerful. Young people like yourselves often are the voices and the hands bringing forward political change. Something else to note on this, just from your terms, that are highlighted here. This is often referred to as a yellow power movement that is going alongside Black power, but also very much hand in hand, right? Trying to be powerful, trying to support one another in this drive toward equality. Some shortcomings there. There has been, even as this political identity has formed, and you might have heard this before, the phrase model minority. It's this idea where a lot of times it can be harnessed to try to pit Asian Americans against other minorities. And it sort of embraces stereotypes. And sometimes people say, well, some of those stereotypes are positive. They're still stereotypes, right? And so there are limitations here. Now, lastly but not leastly, let's go through the LGBTQ plus Americans, and then we'll get to our final slide where I'm going to ask you to reflect for just a moment and to maybe give me some of your ideas, okay? Now, this one is very interesting, very powerful to me because I live not so terribly far from Stonewall, right? So LGBTQ Americans have faced laws, social norms that have criminalized, shamed their identities. And the Stonewall Uprising was in 1969. Again, look at this timeline alongside the Black Civil Rights Movement. It's right there, right? And Stonewall is just like a 15-minute subway ride for me. And so the Stonewall Uprising basically was at Stonewall Bar, right? It's in Greenwich Village here on Manhattan. And a New York law had outlawed homosexuality, and they were raiding bars and things like that. And they raided Stonewall Bar, and people rose up. And it wasn't just the gay men and women in the bar. It was neighboring bars. It was artists in that community. It was just residents saying, back away from our people, our brothers, our sisters, our cousins, our friends, our neighbors, etc. And so activists in these groups very early on demanded safety, dignity, certainly legal rights, right? Equal protection before the law, freedom from discrimination, etc. All right. Now, at the time, notice when this was 1969 is Stonewall, right? You don't get Harvey Milk, which is the first openly gay official in the history of California, right? That was in San Francisco. He was assassinated in 1978. So in that 9-year span, we are pushing, right? And you can see the signs there. Stonewall means fight back. It became a call for this, right? And as you can see, our timeline here, 1973 is PFLAG, right? Protecting, gay children in New York as well, right? Look at the most recent date on those bullets, right? 2015, 10 years ago, right? 11, I guess, technically now, right? Supreme Court federally legalized same-sex marriage in a case called Obergefell versus Hodges. All right. So if you look at 1969 to 2015, that's a pretty long span. So, the frustrations that Malcolm X had spoken about certainly are present in this movement as well. There are shortcomings in this movement as well, right? Discrimination continues. On average, the statistic is that LGBTQ plus people are 9 times more likely than non-LGBT people to be victims of violence, of hate crimes. So this is an ongoing movement. This is one that is taking shape in our lifetime. Not that all the others still aren't ongoing. I think that is something important to recognize. History is fluid. History is continual. You don't just relegate something to the dustbin and then it's over. Okay. Now, here in these last few minutes of class, and we only have a few, I would love for you to reflect for just a moment. I have been with you today for a little bit of the 1960s, but you guys have covered the 50s and the 60s. Really quickly, can everyone? Oh, I just realized I'm jacking up my sharing of my screen here. I apologize, guys. I would love it if everyone, etc., could tell me to what extent did society change? In what ways did society change in the 1950s and 60s? And how did some Americans act to bring about those changes? So what changes have you studied from the 50s through the end of the 60s here in this unit? And how did Americans bring that about? And I would love to hear at least a couple voices. So yeah, again, what have you studied? Tell me, inform me, educate me. What do you think?
I think in the 50s and 60s, people were trying to challenge on inequality and discrimination, and they did that through protest.
Okay. Challenge of discrimination, inequality through protests. Great framed answer there, Paulina. Anyone else? Anyone else that want to add some thoughts there? How or to what extent did society change in the 50s and 60s, and how did some Americans bring that about? No other voices? Well, since we have 90 seconds left, let me give you sort of the framing that Ms. Renard has for us to understand, and then encourage you all to go about getting some work done as we continue on moving ever toward the end of the semester. So consumerism, growth of the middle class is some of the big stuff from the 1950s, right? Women's roles changed back to pre-World War II, right? So all of a sudden we're saying back to being housewives, no working out of the home. The suburbs were created in the 50s and 60s. White collar work and home ownership skyrocketed because of the GI Bill in the wake of the World War II. Things like new music, rock and roll came out, right? Overall, it was an age of conformity with some exception, like the beatniks, who poets and authors that were writing at the time. And there's also a real major fear of communism in the in the wake of World War II as well. So that was increased by the HUAC and the actions of Joseph McCarthy, starting the Red Scare. Advertising and the media, oh man, perpetuated stereotypes of everyone, races, of women, and the expectations thereof, right? And people like the Hollywood 10 resisted the blacklisting, right? And the reach of the HUAC and Joseph McCartney, excuse me. So to go back to the main question, and thank you again for weighing in, Paulina, tons of change. Enormous, dramatic, drastic change in the 50s and 60s. The US became a global power. We were not, right? The Cold War, starting post World War II, right? 50s all the way up through the 90s, really, that's what set us on the global stage. Our economy boomed. Suburbs, like I said, grew. Television all of a sudden is there. Traditional family roles are being promoted, even though we're under this radical change. But underneath all of that prosperity, right? So many Americans were excluded or dissatisfied from that dream and with that dream, I guess. So again, we just went through it. Civil rights activists, right? Women, students, Latinos, Native Americans, Asian Americans, LGBTQ Americans, Black Americans, anti-war protesters. It was pushing there. So Paulina, exactly, right? We have people in the streets demanding justice. So the 50s and the 60s, certainly, a decade of growth, power, flourishing in America, decades of change. But they are also, and this is very important, and this is what we're going to leave with here, guys, because we are about out of time. They're decades of conflict internally over what America can and should be, what we were promised it would be. Again, conflict over what America should be. If there's one thing that unites all of those movements we just breezed through, that's got to be one. Okay? Now, guys, I know I'm not Miss Renard, and that was very fast. I hope that kept with your standards and the vibe of the class. I love talking about this stuff. If anybody has any questions, comments, or concerns about anything we just covered, for goodness sakes, stick around for just a couple minutes. I'm going to stick around if you need me. Otherwise, thank you for being present. Thank you for those that have added your voices. I truly appreciate it. I don't like yapping as much as I did, but we did need to cover a bunch of stuff. So, guys, be safe out there. Continue thinking on this. Please get back into Canvas and continue your work for the week as well. We are down to the last couple weeks, 2-3 weeks of classes, but I want you to finish strong. Again, if you need anything from me, stick around for a brief moment. I'm not going anywhere. Otherwise, thank you for being present, fully present, and please do have a wonderful rest of your day. It was lovely meeting you all. Have a great rest of your day and take care.